Why do perfectly kind and reasonable people find it impossible to believe that we are genuinely ill? Here are the 6 surprising reasons, including a bit of brain science. As young children, we learn unconscious models about how the world works. Sadly, some of the beliefs and models about illness make it very difficult for people living with invisible illness or symptoms to be believed. Let's look at the 3 models that cause the worst problems. The first stumbling block is that our brains are hardwired to recognize physical things. We use our 5 senses, smell, hearing, taste, sight, and touch, to understand and make sense of the world. In the same way that we judge whether a piece of fruit is okay to eat, we rely on visible signs to judge whether someone is healthy. If someone doesn't look sick, no temperature, no runny nose, no cough, no rash, then they must be well. This is our model of illness. As a child, my mother only let us take days off school if we had a temperature. If we didn't, we were healthy, and that's how it's learned. Secondly, on top of this, we usually have a flu model of illness, which is you get sick, you spend a few days in bed, and then you're better. People just don't have a framework to understand how younger people can be sick for months or years. And the story gets worse. There's something else that comes into play. Society has always been wary of people who might take advantage of other people's hard work. So people seem to be very skeptical of other people if they say they can't do something, if they can't see anything wrong with them. As part of this, there is an ethos that even if you are sick, you can still push through. This is part of a 1980s ad for a cold and flu tablet. Should be back in bed. Soldier on with cotton. Terrifying, absolutely terrifying. But also notice the focus on physical illness at the start. Despite COVID, indeed, only 2 weeks ago, Catherine, the UK's Princess of Wales, who has been having chemotherapy, talked about how some days she had to give in to the fatigue, implying it's bad or it's a weakness. Generally, people end up with the belief, even if we're sick, we should keep going. The illness isn't really serious. But can't people change their beliefs? You might well ask. After all, we often change our taste in music, clothes, sometimes even friends. Unfortunately, it's not that simple. There are 3 significant barriers that stop people from changing their beliefs about illness, changing their minds about us. Firstly, it's difficult because we are not usually aware of our unconscious beliefs we use to judge a situation. It's part of how the brain efficiently helps us manage life. But it's very hard to change something we're not aware of. And then our language doesn't help. In English, for example, the words to describe fatigue are tired, very tired, and exhausted. If we look at this scale of tiredness, very tired and exhausted fit about here in everyday life. When we are exhausted, say we've had a busy day or week, we can still stay up all night with a sick child, or if that special person texts, go out. Contrast this with chronic illness tiredness. It extends much further along the scale, right up to needing full-time care. But we don't have words to accurately describe this, so it's hard to communicate how we feel. It's why we experience so much anger and pushback when we say to people we're tired, because people are using their understanding of what tiredness means. And it's a similar story with pain and depression. Doctors often use numerical scales to understand how someone is feeling because there are no adequate words. Similarly, there are no common words to describe the devastating crashes that some people get if they overdo it. But there is something else about how the brains work. When we believe something, we tend to interpret new information as confirming what we already believe to be true. We focus on the facts that support our belief and unconsciously dismiss those that don't. This is sometimes called confirmation bias. It's why it's so hard to get someone to change their mind. We've all been in a situation where we believe we're right and that the other person is wrong, but neither person will change their mind. Just think politics. So deep-rooted and strong is our confirmation bias that major companies take active steps to try and stop it to protect themselves from making bad decisions. That happened, for example, in the Challenger disaster, where the whole spaceship blew up. And it's this confirmation bias that kicks in unconsciously when we try to get somebody to change their opinion about illness. We have no more success than we do in trying to get someone to change their mind about politics. Putting it all together, even kind, reasonable people hold deep, unconscious and wrong beliefs about how illness should look and how long it lasts. They believe we should be able to push through. And because there are no suitable words to explain our symptoms, and because of how the brain functions, it's extremely difficult to get someone to change their mind, which is what we see all the time. This is a tough situation when we want to be understood by our family, our friends, and perhaps at work. I would use stronger language to describe the situation, but I think YouTube would be unhappy. Although it's hard to accept, I think that knowing the reasons for someone's rigid disbelief helps us find ways to manage it. So the focus moves from an angry, "you should understand, why can't you understand?" to, "we have very different opinions. So how can we make our friendship or relationship work?" And getting to this position may include you grieving that you cannot share what's going on with you with people close to you, and also setting boundaries and enjoying what you do share. In some cases, it may mean having less to do with someone, or perhaps not seeing them at all. And it can take a long time to accept that things aren't how we want them to be or how we think they should be. But this approach does help us preserve the good things in our relationships and friendships with those nice, reasonable people. For me, in coming to acceptance of this lack of understanding, it was helpful to think of it as another symptom. I also wonder if I hadn't experienced an invisible illness when I was young, I might also have found it difficult to understand other people when they talked about invisible symptoms. I certainly didn't appreciate how devastating grief could be until my father died. As part of managing, patient support groups can be crucial because they allow you to connect with people who understand what you're going through and to validate your experience. It's not all in your head. Is the situation completely hopeless? Well, as with any new idea that challenges assumptions, a few people will get it, and some others may slowly be persuaded with factual information, so that eventually the accepted view changes. But unfortunately, it can take years. As an example, the germ theory of illness, which has led to antibiotics and sterile operating rooms and saved so many lives, still took about 50 years to be really accepted. But I hope that social media and the internet will really speed up the acceptance of new ideas. I'd like to work to change not only your immediate circle's beliefs, but also wider societies, perhaps by publicising your story or advocating more formally. I hope this has helped you understand why some of the people closest to you just cannot grasp the biggest thing that is happening in your life. I know this is a rather controversial topic, and I look forward to reading your comments. If you would like to find out more about living well with chronic illness, please subscribe. It does help the channel, and watch the next video.